a couple of words, and then we'll move through this. I'll share my screen in just a second. 2 weeks ago was the first time I ever showed up here. Carrie Turner invited me, and it was very interesting. And I only discovered why I wrote the talk I did like 10 minutes ago. By the way, I always turned my homework in late and almost never followed instructions, so nothing's new here. But I think my talk is a not very direct response to the feeling I had 2 weeks ago when I listened to the talks about designing governments. And I just realized it's sort of like a childhood trauma, except it was a mid-adult trauma. I participated for 5 years in Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's largest grant ever to redesign American healthcare. And like all large grants, the final summary was pitched as a success, but it was an utter failure, as almost all large grants are. And it was because the paradigm was Toyota production system, the idea that you can find yourself in a mess with an archaic aging system, whether it's your body or your government or the American healthcare system. And then you can learn from Toyota and you can just go fix it. And I, really literally just in the last 10 minutes that I realized that's what my talk is a reaction to. And my own assessment, and people who know me know I'm opinionated and overdetermined and overstate everything. But my own reaction to that, over 10 years was that we really missed something. It would be like trying to keep all the old people alive and not having any children. It would be like putting all your money into the ICU instead of the nursery. There's just something not quite right about trying to repair dysfunctional things. And I want to be clear, if you are the dysfunctional thing, you damn well should be trying to repair yourself. I'm not suggesting mass suicide of old people or old governments. But if you want a better government, you probably ought to be like plants, perennials or annuals. You should be starting anew in some form every year so that you fit the environment. George and I, everything I've read, every time I've talked to George, every time I've heard him speak, I agree absolutely with everything he says. So there won't, if anyone thinks we're arguing, we're missing the fact that we're coming at, I think we see the same world and we have different ways of talking about it. So I'm not going to repeat my talk. I'm going to share the screen and I'm just going to go from the headings and move through it really quickly. So those of you who got a chance to look at it. Okay, good. So this looks like a lot, but it really is pretty much everything I had to say, and it's 15 minutes of talking, and I'm not going to do that. So I just did my new version of my, introduction there. The next, I can make this a little bit bigger. The next slide is where I talk, about how do I think about government. And for me, the world always comes down to people or civil society, government, how we decide things together, and then businesses we get into that are really focused and really powerful because of their focus and their resource intensity. So this thing, you can listen to it if you want, but basically my idea of the world is that there are three connections between these things. Civil society creates itself one way or the other, and creates governments and creates businesses. And George was sort of saying that in his own way. And, he and I can chat about this later if there are real differences. But there's this process that I think is invent, organize, and participate. And, US government, we don't participate. Most government, we don't participate. So it's bound to fail. The next, and each one of these talks is like, that's 44 seconds, okay? They're really short. But what I think happens is we've got a nested set of governing recursions or living recursions from, the individual, the household, the neighborhood, the municipality, all the way up to the world, sort of, maybe. But what happens when you get above the mother in the household in the neighborhood, we typically sort of depersonalize and delocalize institutions. And I think that's tragic in its consequences. It's, if we don't keep in mind that it's our children that we're living for, or if you don't have children, the future of the planet. If we think it's about accumulating wealth so that we can die with a pyramid and a you know, enclosed chamber, you know, hoping that, you know, we get into heaven with all our shit, you know, that's just a goofy way of thinking.
Excuse me, but could you put your slides on full size? I can't read them on my screen.
How's that?
That's better.
Yeah, and all I'm doing, I'm just talking. You have this presentation. I'm just sort of riffing on it, but I'm just saying here for what happens when you go from this, which is all particular and personalized and local, and it's about mothers and neighborhoods and maybe men who support mothers and children in neighborhoods. Here you go into abstractions, and I think this moving up from where we live most of our lives physically and emotionally to, you know, higher and higher level recursions. The risk is that it becomes quite abstract, and you know, what we do with abstractions can be tragic. And then the next piece of talk is what I consider the origin of governments. And you would here, I'll make this just let me do this. Whoops, sorry. 1 second. I just need to do this, and then I'll get you a version of this you can read. All right, so this, if you can see this, I hope you can. This is sort of Marc Pierson's, you know, childish view of how governing comes into being. For me, it's about particular people in particular places who have particular conversations, meaning localized, face-to-face. And then they make decisions, and over time, this is sort of George's thing back to the Fertile Crescent and before, you know, they recognize patterns that it makes sense to repeat, and then they may or may not formalizing, depending on whether it's a tribe or the Fertile Crescent, you know, into governments. But to me, that's some version, that's my version of how, you know, of the origin of governing at its very basis. And, you know, it's 7 nodes, 14 edges. It's not a terribly complex graph. And you can listen to me talk about that if you want. It's pretty brief. And then here again, I'll make this bigger for you. You can see that when you add government in, something new shows up, and business, something new shows up. Government is supposed to constrain and support business and people living in their homes and civil society. But businesses, you know, as they start growing, they end up having a little more influence than citizens. They may, they don't have to, but they may. Oh my God. Hang on. Somehow I've clicked. Let me find which one is talking.
You're talking on number 4.
Thank you very much. Okay, so so we've got through sort of those two, and then the dynamics, the beginning dynamics of what happens with these potential interactions. Potential interactions with in this little world of you know, 4 nodes, but a new node, 3 nodes. A new one shows up, and that is that as business becomes has more and more influence, it can get government to pay more attention to itself and less attention to people. And it can, both these two together, unconstrained, become predatory. And by the way, I'm just talking about government because that's what the topic is. For me, this is all about US healthcare, okay? So it applies to any large archaic institution. US healthcare, I mean, not to sound like a crazy person, but we demonstrably kill as many people as we save every year. So you're paying 18% of your gross national product if you're only counting deaths, you know, as a net zero. So yeah, and then of course we frustrate the heck out of you. So government, education, healthcare, doesn't matter to me. They all have similar dynamics, which is what made it worthwhile for me to you know, to play around with this for a while. So the real point of my slide, actually, of my talk, or the real point of my life at the moment, is this this stuff not Ross, but Mick Ashby really. I'm doing some work in neighborhoods, and as I learn what's going on there, I become terrified at the latent conflict built into between them and local government, and basically their experience of being attacked by predators. And I know too much about the neighborhood, so if I let them see what they are saying in private, publicly, I'm going to be a disaster. So I was quite worried for the last 6 months, and then I come across Nick Ashby's paper on becoming ethical. And I think that if you can see here, I can do one thing here. I can just make it bigger like this. And so you can see this. And so becoming ethical, I think, needs to be added into the thing, and it needs to apply not just to government, because civil society isn't particularly ethical, and certainly businesses in general are not particularly ethical. But if we want that other ugly drawing to go back to normal, you actually have to do something that is quite different than going to church or being nice to your friends and family. It really is almost an engineering feat, and that is saying, what do our agreements need to look like so that they are demonstrably more ethical than they are today? I mean, that's what Mick is up to. And I talked to him, and I love what he's thinking. And of course, I love the fact that he's Ross Ashby's grandson, because Ross Ashby is one of my heroes, though of course I never met him. And then the final piece is really just putting all the slides together, so you could go look at it if you want, and saying what I just said, that for me, the issues, I mean, it's just the total graph, and I sent you a PDF of it. But for me, the issues are only two. How can we make good decisions together at all scales, and call it governing if we like? How can it be designed so those with the most variety, which to me are mothers in neighborhoods, and I'm not excluding men who know how to behave like women, but statistically I am talking about women, and how can we have them give us almost all the information we need for governing, and only solve problems that they can't, but always in ways that they approve of? And then how do we design ethical behavior into our civil and institutional processes? So that's where I am. And just a word of appreciation to Ward Cunningham, that and he was invited to talk at Corvallis, at the ISSS in Corvallis. He gave a talk. I missed it. I wish I had known about it or paid more attention, but he gave a talk on this new thing he's doing, which is the Federated Wiki, which he and I and a small band of other people think it's orders of magnitude more important than the original wiki, but acts synergistically. So that whole presentation and all that is done in Ward Cunningham's Federated Wiki. So that's it. I hope that wasn't too broken. And if you're interested in any of the topics, you can go back and look at it.
Okay. I'm good. Mark, can I be just a little bit